What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today is going to be another one of my absolute favorites, which is what I read this past month and recaps of all of the books. So today we are doing the July edition of this. It is currently August the 2nd here, and I can't wait to share the books with you guys. It's reading time here at JB's Corner. So before we get started, just a little bit of a background. My name is Jaya. I put out videos every Wednesday and Sunday on bookish related content. Every once in a while, there's a random smattering of things that show up, such as travel vlogs and just, haul videos and things like that. But most of the channel, I would say a solid 90 to 95% of the channel is bookish related content, primarily dedicated to all genres of fiction. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, you're definitely in the right place, and I hope you enjoy this video. For those of you that are returning, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you back and to be building this bookish community with you guys. And without further ado, let's jump into the books. So I try to do themed months whenever I can in terms of reading. And so I just wanted to say that this month's theme was kind of Greek, mythological inspired. So whether it be Egyptian, Greek, as I already mentioned, which was the primary heavy hitter in this collection of books, or Norse mythology, Camelot, Arthurian mythology, whatever it may be. I was basically trying to focus on mythology related plots. However, I am a part of a couple of different book clubs, and one of my book clubs actually picked a book this year that is not related to those topics. I did not get the physical copy of this particular book. I ended up going for a different version, which was the online version of the book. So I'm trying to find that book for you guys, which is why I'm not looking at the screen right now, so bear with me. But the book we ended up reading was Famous for a Living. This book is by Melissa Ferguson, and it was super cute. Looking at the cover, it does feel like it would be a very summery title, but it actually ended up being more of a winter title for me personally. There's a lot of snowstorms, ice storms, camp vibes, definitely like wintry themes to this book, but overall it was really, really cute. So the basic gist of this book is there's a woman who is our main character who happens to be very famous influencer, and she basically gets all of her money through the sponsorships that she has and this Instagram life that she has. So very high fashion, very material focused, but overall gem of a heart, and she just loves to host people. She loves having family around. She doesn't have the best family background herself in terms of her relationship with her biological parents. And so she ends up like getting very close to her uncle, who is not in this space at all. And in the beginning, even when her uncle shows up to a party, she's just so warm and welcoming towards him and his assistant. Needless to say, as the book progresses, very early on in the book, she basically goes through a situation where her entire presence online is turned and flipped upside down. So she goes from a character who is adored, like America's sweetheart, and turns into infamy and just has a lot of negativity coming her way. So during this process, in order to rebrand herself as well as to find herself, she ends up going to the small town that her uncle is currently situated at to help him with his campaign and to basically be there to help boost his credibility and his presence online, as well as bring this town to the knowledge of people or tourists that may want to come visit. And in the process of this, she also meets his assistant again, and they end up hitting it off. Very grumpy sunshine vibes in that regard. And overall, just a very cute, very fun story. The story overall was very predictable in my humble opinion, but I think it's just written very well. The characters are very, very well described and fleshed out. And I loved the fact that there's no miscommunication. The characters are very good at communicating with one another and having conversations. There's also underlying conversation around the influence of social media on our lives, which I think is so pertinent to today in particular. So I do think that this was a really interesting read. It was very fun. It was very enjoyable. And I definitely gave it a solid 4 stars, even though it was such a predictable storyline, just because of how beautiful the story was laid out by the author. And again, that is Famous for a Living by Melissa Ferguson. The second book that I want to talk about here is a book that's also young adult, and it is our first Greek themed book. And this is A Twisted Tale, written by Jen Calonita, and it is none other than Go the Distance. This story basically picks up from the end of the Hercules cartoon. If anyone has watched that movie before, it was a childhood memory for me. It's something that has been one of my ultimate favorite movies since I was a little girl. I absolutely love the dynamic of Meg and Hercules, and I absolutely adore Meg as a main female lead. I do think that even though she gets tricked into some shitty situations, pardon my language, and I do think even though she finds herself in some very difficult positions and has to make some very challenging decisions and very much embodies that concept of like temptress / damsel in distress, I like the fact that her character, even at a young age, shows that women can be a vast spectrum of personality. Like, you don't have to fit in just one specific description. We fit so many different roles. And I think Meg's character really showcases that. And this book basically picks up from where the movie ended, which is where Hercules and Megra are basically up in Olympus, and Zeus is asking Hercules what he wants. The twist on this tale is that Hercules is basically told that he's not allowed to become mortal and stay with Megra. He must stay a god. And Megra is given a quest that if she succeeds, she will get to become a god and stay with Hercules. Otherwise, she will be pulled apart from Hercules. So this entire book is actually following the quest that Megra goes on and shows us her growth as an individual and her coming into being a hero, a true hero. And I think that was a really fun twist on a very classic tale. And I think it was kind of fun to see Meg go through all these things. You also get to see a lot of old characters kind of show face again. So Phil is back, and then we also have the Pegasus that's back. Hades is back in this for a little bit as well. You have other gods that are actually more prominent. So Zeus was very prominent in the first book, in the movie series, but in this you actually have a little bit more of Athena and Hera that are showing up, even a touch of Aphrodite. And I just think that was so much more fun. Very female focused, very, very interesting plot point and plot twist. And the whole concept is that she has been sent on a quest to save the wife of the man that left her and bound her to Hades. So very interesting read. It was fun. It was easy to read. It was enjoyable. It's a nice, quick, fun, fast-paced book. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily write home about this. I do think there are other Greek mythology books that are slightly more entertaining or better, or definitely captured more of my attention after I'd finished the book. So for that reason, this is a 3-star book, but it was a very enjoyable read while I read it, and I would still say it's a fun one to pick up and enjoy. The next book that I want to talk about today is by Sebastian. So we're taking a little bit of a detour here into King Arthur and his Camelot and Round Table vibes. This book is called Half Sick of Shadows. It is It is written by Sebastian. This book was absolutely phenomenal. This book not only spoke to me while I read it, but it stuck with me after I finished it. And this was very close to being a 5-star for me. It wasn't quite a 5-star. It was like a 4.5. But I do think this book was written beautifully. This is following the story of King Arthur and his friends from the perspective of Lady Elaine. In this book, Lady Elaine actually is not told in the classic way of her character being written, but rather she is described as almost being an oracle who sees what's going to come and knows that over a course of time, Morgana and Arthur will have issues that come up. Guinevere is going to hurt Arthur with Lancelot, and she herself doesn't know what her role is in all of this. She's training under Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, in order to better understand, what the future holds and how she could potentially influence the future so that the friendships don't fray. But basically, it follows the childhood of all of these characters: Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, Morgana, from childhood all the way into adulthood. And you also get to see Elaine and Lancelot's relationship. For those that may not know, Elaine and Lancelot were married when the whole Lancelot and Guinevere thing happens, and Guinevere and Arthur are obviously married when that whole thing happens. So it's interesting to read her perspective on their romance, because she's literally telling the story of their romance with the knowledge that there's a high chance that she will be betrayed by him. So overall, just a really interesting read. And I do think that in general, the beauty of this book is that it's very female centric. and it really talks about the strength of the female characters and their roles and relationships with the males in terms of being an advisor capacity. And it also flushes out a little bit of the male characters too. You really get to see a little bit more of King Arthur. You also get to see the two sides of the equation between Nimue and Merlin, and the sides of the battle that they have chosen between the humans and the Fae. So I do think this was a really, really fun read. This was, like, again, a solid 4.5 star for me. Just so much character development. There are trigger warnings in this book, so I just want you to be aware. There's signs of cheating, depression, suicidal ideation, all kinds of things that do come up in this book, which are very, very intense. I do think there's also like moments where you feel betrayal, parental neglect, all kinds of crazy things that do show up throughout this book, but written in a very classy way, in my humble opinion, and not overwhelming to the point where it just breaks you down, but rather like there's light at every moment at the end of the tunnel. And I do think the way the book ended was phenomenal. I think this telling of Lady Elaine and her role in the story, really bringing her to light and not just letting her being a wallflower that's dying from sadness, that's like wilting away in the background, was a beautiful way of depicting her. And I do think, considering it's a myth, it was really fun to see the story of Arthur told with the perspective of how much he needs his friends in order to become who he is. Great book. The next book that I'm going to talk about, we're going back to Greek mythology, and that is Abigail Owens' The Games Gods Play. This is such a fun book. So the concept of this book is basically the gods of Olympus have wars and battles and fights against themselves that potentially almost led to the end of the world. And so they decided that whenever they have this inkling that power shifts need to occur, and in order to entertain themselves, they will host a crucible once a year. And the concept of this crucible is that a human is selected in order to compete in this crucible in the name of a god. And when they compete through the crucible, if they win at the end of the 12th labor and successfully have the most awards or wins throughout the course of the crucible, then their god will become the patron god of that time, and they'll basically ascend to being king of the gods. And the human that competed in their behest and became the winner of the crucible is then given an elevated status and is allowed to come and live in Mount Olympus. So in this book, our main female lead character is basically pushed into a position where she is unwillingly selected to be the champion for Hades. Now, the kings and other gods are very, very concerned about the fact that Hades had decided to compete in this year's crucible because it has never been heard of that he has competed before. And they're all terrified of what it would look like for the world if the king of the underworld, the king of death, ends up becoming king of the gods. So in the storyline, you basically have our main female lead character who has also been cursed by Zeus to never be lovable, never be approachable. And she is now put in the situation where she's competing against others against her will. And she just wants to survive. She just wants to make it through to the end. And she wants her curse lifted. This is her goal. This is her purpose of being in this crucible. She inadvertently starts to fall for Hades as well, and then we also get to see his reaction. In this book, Hades is not married to Persephone, but does have a very soft spot for her and cares for her a lot. And at the beginning of the book, it is understood that Persephone has died and that she's no longer in the picture. So basically, this girl and Hades start forming a connection, and she's also competing in these crucibles in order to get to the end game. That's all I'm really going to share about this book. I realize that was a little bit vague, but I do not want to spoil the ending because there is a sequel for this book coming out in October. And I do think spoiling the ending of this book would defeat the purpose of enjoying this book. But if you like trials, if you like Greek mythology, if you like, forbidden romance plots, if you like she's mine, touch her and die type of, relationships, if you like, just that broody, protective male character and also that wily female character, this is a great book to read. It's so much fun. It's so easy to read. And this one was so good. I physically read this book from start to finish, and I finished it, I think, within 3 or 4 days. I loved this book so much. And this is one of those books where I had to physically be holding it in order to read it. It just immerses you into the story. This was a solid 4-star read for me. I absolutely adored it, and I would definitely recommend it. The next book that I have here on my list is Jasmine Moss's Blood of Hercules. And I felt like this was a great segue into this book from The Games Gods Play because they're both set up in similar vibes, if you will. This one also has a touch of dark academia to it, in my humble opinion. In this book, we have our main female character who is just trying to survive. She is homeless. She is coming from a terrible, terrible, terrible upbringing. Her foster family was cruel. They used to hurt her. She and her foster brother barely make it out alive. They essentially end up raising themselves after a certain point. And now she's in high school and she just wants to survive. Needless to say, even though she's picked on and she's treated like the homeless trash, she ends up in a position where during a test, it is revealed that she has God's blood within her system, and she gets thrown into the Spartan wars, and she's found herself at the Roman Colosseum where she has to compete in order to save her own life. After this point, she gets selected to be under the patronage of some of our quote-unquote villains, which is Patro and Achilles, and under their guidance and as their champion, she has to go through a crucible. This crucible is set up a little bit differently. It still has tasks that she has to complete, but it's set up more like a school system where they have a bunch of tests and quizzes that they have to overcome, and any failures that they have, they are physically punished and physically tested in order to ensure their bravery and their strength. The concept being that if you have Spartan blood in your system and you successfully make it through the crucible and you graduate, then you are granted the gift of immortality, so you can't die. Within the Spartan government, there is also the houses of the gods that are considered the Olympian houses. And then you also have the Chthonic houses. The Chthonic houses are basically the houses of the darker gods, and their children are basically the ones who end up protecting everyone against the Titans. So the Olympian houses are the house of Zeus, the house of Hera, the house of Athena, the house of Hermes, the house of Poseidon, the house of Demeter, the house of Apollo, and the house of Dionysus. The Chthonic houses are the house of Ares, the house of Hades, the house of Artemis, and the house of Aphrodite. So we have the 12 houses. Within the Chthonic lines, we have our main characters who are Charon, who is the son of Erebus and Artemis. We have Helen, who is a house heiress. So she is considered very precious because there are very few female Spartans left, and she's not allowed to compete in the crucible in order to protect her status. She's the daughter of Aphrodite and Ares. Then you have the Achilles character, who is the son of a human and Ares. You have Augustus, who is the son of Ares and Aphrodite. He is a house heir as well. And then you have human Aphrodite combination, which is Patro or Patroclus. So all these characters are very much based in the original stories of Greek mythology that we hear. Those names basically pop up again. But this is a reimagined system where we have the Spartan government that is considered elevated and higher, and they eventually have immortality. And they basically protect humanity from all the Titans and the attacks and things like that. And then you have poverty-stricken human lands where the humans are basically just going about their days trying to survive. And the Spartans are almost looked at as like celebrities. And then the Olympians and the gods are also celebrated in their own way. But these Spartan mutts, these Spartan children are the ones that are really garnering favor within the society. And people love to watch them compete. Meanwhile, our main female character is just trying to survive. As she makes it through the various stages of the crucible, more and more about her heritage and her background is revealed. But she's really walking into this book with no one on her side, no one supporting her, like feeling very bullied. For those who like Zodiac Academy and like those types of books, this is a great book. There is a component of bully romance to this. There's also some reverse harem vibes in this book as well. But I would say the romance is not overpowering. In fact, there's only one real spicy scene in this book. Most of it is more about the character development and the character story. All I can say is I think this was a very fresh way of reimagining the Greek mythologies. And I do think that in general, this book had a lot to offer. And I think that this was a super fun read. Again, I don't want to give too many details into the plotline of the book because I think it's more enjoyable to read it. But I can honestly say this was a 5-star read for me. One of the few that I've experienced this year, just because of how unique and reimagined this book is. It did take me a while to get into the book. I will say, like, it took like the first almost 100 pages for me to really delve into this book. But once I did, it was just so hard to put down. And there were multiple times where I gave up sleep in order to sit and finish this book. And again, this was one of those books where I had to physically read it, and I just needed this book in my hand, fully immersed, 100%. Loved this book. Let's take a little bit of a detour away from the Greek mythology and talk a little bit about Norse mythology. A few years ago, there was a book that came out, which was A Fate Inked in Blood. That book was absolutely phenomenal. It was following this female lead character who is the daughter of a god who is a shield maiden, and she's forced into servitude for a king that's believed to be cruel and that she does not want to serve. Meanwhile, she also has a romance happening with his son. And through the course of her adventures, she realizes that men are not very trustworthy and she doesn't know which side of the equation she falls on. By the end of the book, she basically gets kidnapped by the other side, and now she has to figure out where her loyalties lie. This is the second book in that series, A Curse Carved in Bone by Danielle, Jensen, and it was lovely. This book, I do think at certain points derailed a little bit for me though, so that's why the rating is still going to be about a 3.75 to 4-star read. But I wouldn't even call it a 4. I would say 3.5 to 3.75 for me. But this was still a very, very enjoyable book, and the second book in the duology, and it wraps up the story very beautifully. In this book, our beautiful, what is her name? Freya. Freya is now finding herself betrayed, and she's basically in a position where she's in the enemy camp, and she needs to figure out whether she wants to support the enemy or the original king that she was drawn to servitude for. She's also still bound by her blood oath to the other king, so she cannot directly attack against him. She's also forced to work with her enemy and is forced to realize that some of them are actually very human at heart and they're good people. There's also some betrayal and crazy plot twists that happen through the course of this book as well. She's also trying to meet one of our other male lead characters, Bjorn's mother, in order to understand what her future has to hold, because she's a seer and she was gifted the blood of Odin, so she can tell the future. And so through the course of this book, basically, she's just trying to survive and go through all of these adventures and tribulations in order to save her people and in order to help the right king. She and Bjorn also have their romance that's going on, their frenemy romance that's happening, and she's fighting it, but she's also in love with him. And that part is also very, very cute to read as well. But I think overall this book was really fun. Again, I can't give too many details on this one because it is the second book in the series. So without revealing some of the plot twists from the first book, I'm unable to do so. But just for knowledge purposes, the first book I thought was a solid 4 to 4.5 stars. It was an excellent book. It was so beautifully written, so much fun to read, and Norse mythology was different and unique and fun for this mythological genre area. And I will say the second book still delivered. It was still really fun. I did enjoy the first book more, but again, this was still a solid 3.75 read for me. Coming back into Greek mythology, we have Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra was excellent. Again, this is a solid 4.75 star read for me. This was so good. Clytemnestra is basically following the story of Clytemnestra, a daughter of Sparta, one of the half-sisters of Helen of Troy, and it basically follows her story all the way from childhood till the very end after Sparta falls and she ends up murdering King Agamemnon. She's the wife of King Agamemnon. She has birthed him many children, and she was considered the fair but not cruel per se, but fair but scary ruler of where was she ruling? Why am I blanking? I believe of Sparta. Right? I'm pretty sure of Sparta. But like basically her storyline is focused and intertwined with the stories that you hear in the Iliad, the Odyssey plotline. And her story predates that of the Odyssey. It also ends up overlapping a little bit with the story in the Odyssey. You also get to see some of those characters as well. But all of the common Greek mythological characters that you expect to see, you get to see. The beauty of Clytemnestra as a book that Costanza Casati has woven into this story is that she really, really captures the spirit and the energy of these Grecian women and just the hell that they endured in their relationships, but also the strength that they possessed, and really showcased their immortality in this story with just being how powerful they are and the essence of their royalty and their spirit. So I think this book was just very well written. It's basically a retelling of the story of Clytemnestra. Anyone who has read any of the ballads would know what this story has to offer. Anyone who's read Agamemnon will know what this story has to offer, but I just thought it was very fun and very unique to read the story from the perspective of Clytemnestra herself. So again, 4.75 star, absolutely loved this book. The next book that I want to talk about is Hera. So we're still going to stick with the Greek mythology vibes. This is written by Jennifer Saint, and this is the story of the goddess Hera from her inception when she helped Zeus overthrow the Titans, all the way to being forced into a marriage with him against her will and slowly feeling like she's losing her power and her strength in Olympus, all the way to the petty wars that she has with Olympus and with Zeus, and how it affects humankind, whether it be in relation to Perseus or Hercules or, Theseus, any of these other major Greek heroes that we hear about. We get to hear it from the perspective of Hera and how she chose to influence those various heroes. We also get to see her as both a benevolent and a vengeful woman. We also get to see her relationship with the creatures of the depth, the monsters, and Echidna and Typhus and all these other common names that we hear in Greek mythology. And at the very end, we also get to see her as she tries to hold on to this idea of home and create home for all the gods around her as the world continues to change and humankind potentially may be outgrowing the gods. So you get to see Hera at all of her different periods, and you get to see her through all these different layers of character growth. And I just think overall this book was very cute and it was very well done. I do think that between the two, Clytemnestra, I did prefer more, but I still think that Jennifer Saint is just really good at weaving these stories. I've read Ariadne by her before, and I remember really enjoying that one, and I am interested in potentially picking up Electra, especially now that I've finished Clytemnestra, so I kind of want to read that Electra story and get further into the mindset of Electra to better understand the Electra complex that people like to talk about in psychology. But I think overall, both of these books, all of these books that are coming about like the Greek female roles and their strength and their characters, has been really fun to read. So this one I would say was a solid 3.5 stars for me. I still think it's a fun book to just pick up and enjoy. But if you're looking one that has a powerful oomph and just hits home, I think Clytemnestra was more of that book for me, only because Clytemnestra pulled out so much more emotion. But Hera was also excellent. I would now like to take a little bit of a detour and enter into Egypt, where we will talk very briefly about these two books. What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez and Where the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez. I did a full thorough duology review on these. That video will be coming out soon as well. So if you are interested in more of an in-depth series reviews, that is definitely the way to go. This is basically following the story of a young woman who believes that her parents are dead, and so she comes to Egypt in order to understand how their deaths occurred and to unveil and understand what projects that they were working on in order to better understand her parents. And basically it's also a slight coming of age story at the same time as well. I think the concept was beautiful. I think the author's writing style is beautiful. I think the setting in Egypt was awesome. I think the story just fell a little flat for me. So this one ended up being a 3-star. This one ended up being a 2-star. I really didn't like this book, but again, I do think there's some redeeming qualities to both books. I do think that the author's writing style is beautiful, and I do potentially see myself picking up a different book by Isabel Ibanez in the future. But I will say I was very disappointed by the second book in this series. But again, a full series reviews will be coming out soon, where I will discuss in more detail what I thought about the book in that video. The last two books that I want to talk about are also a series. This is Threads That Bind and Hearts That Cut, and we are back to the Greek mythology vibe. So in this book, we are basically following the story of Io and her sisters Ava and Thais, as they are the daughters of fate, and they have the power to weave, prolong, and cut threads of fate that bind all the different humans together. Io is basically a detective, and she's hired in Threads That Bind to figure out who is manipulating these otherborns who are without magical powers, and they are being murdered by people that are basically being turned into wraiths. And no one understands where these wraiths come from, how they're even alive, because their life force has been completely cut. So this book was very interesting. You get to follow a lot of investigative kind of story plot. You get a lot of adventure. You also get a lot of character development, a lot of family related discussions happening. And then the romance in this book is also very, very cute between Io and Ide. And then in Hearts That Cut, after a very, very, very painful and shocking ending to Threads That Bind. Io has to pick up the shards from where she has been left off, and now she's on the pursuit of the gods themselves in order to understand why they are weaving the threads that they're weaving and why she is suddenly such a threat to the gods and to the world and to the system that everybody knows. So as she's journeying through these books in order to riddle out this mystery, you just also get a lot of heart and love in this book. I would honestly say this series really spoke to me. I'm doing a full series review on these two books too, so I'll leave it there. But I do think that these books were absolutely excellent and I thoroughly enjoyed reading them. Both books were a solid 4-star read for me. And that does bring me to the end of this video. If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for being here. That was all 12 books that I decided to read this July, and I hope you guys did enjoy. There's a couple of books that didn't quite make the cut. One of them was The 13th Child. I realized as I was reading more into the synopsis of that book that it's not really based on mythology, it's just more pure fantasy. So I figured it wasn't the most appropriate. And then for Never a Hero, that series, the third book in the series is actually releasing this upcoming month. So I would rather read the series when they're complete and whole rather than just reading the first 2 books and then waiting for the third book. So I did consciously choose not to finish those books as well. But the other 12 books on the TBR I was able to complete. So those are my thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed. If any of this description of these books has made you want to add them to your TBR, or if any of them are books that you have read yourself and you have the same thoughts or different thoughts, please leave me comments below. I love reading through the comments. I love communicating with you guys. At the end of the day, that's what reading's about. That's what this channel is about, is just creating a community where everyone can have a world of imagination and a world of story to share. If that sounds like it's up your alley and you're new here and you made it this far, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell. I put out videos every Wednesday and Sunday for those that are interested. For everyone who is returning, thank you so much for being here. It's so special to have you guys all here with me and supporting me through this process and sharing this love for reading. It means the world to me. So thank you for being here. That being said, wherever you are, morning, evening, or night, I hope you're having a blessed day with your loved ones, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye, guys.